So let's do that. My name is Mia Kulewind. I'm the IAB chair, and today Russ White is sharing with me, who is also on the IAB. And I think we start right away, or Russ, do you want to add something? Yeah, let me show the note. Well, probably you have seen this by now already. Even so this is an IAB meeting, it's still a contribution to the IETF, so you should be aware of the IPR rules and all other participation rules. Especially, please notice our code of conduct and the anti-harassment procedures, which are also linked here on the slide. I don't think we had problems in this meeting, but it's generally important to be friendly to each other, to respect each other, to provide constructive feedback, to be welcoming newcomers. So in that sense, hopefully we can provide some good contributions in this meeting as well. So please keep that in mind. Also, not only when you speak up, but also everywhere and also in the chat. Okay. Yeah, so we always have this slide, what is IAB Open, because it's kind of still relatively new, but it's not that new anymore. We do it for nearly 2 years now. So this is really an organized session by the IAB to focus on some technical and architectural topics and discussions for two purposes. One is to increase the visibility of what the IAB is doing, also to have a forum to discuss with the community and get feedback from the communities. That's what we're doing here. I wanted to provide a little bit more information about how to reach the IAB. I usually have this on the slides that you can reach the IAB directly by sending an email to iab@iab.org. What we noticed is that not everybody's aware that not only IAB members are listening to this list. So we have some people from staff also on this list, and our list also, and these kind of people. So we put this information now everywhere where you might look for it on the web page and these kind of things. And also want to know people hear about this, so everybody is aware. If you have confidential information, feel free to send it to me directly. For example, if you want to make sure it only goes to a limited set of people. We have the IAB list to reach IAB. We also have some other lists. We have the architecture discuss list, which is really an open list for community discussion, and that's where all the discussion about architectural and technical topics happen, and also related to IAB documents. So feel to subscribe there and free to post there and start a discussion. We have just made an open mailing list for programs where the community can also subscribe and engage in a topic that is related to the program, or even propose topics that are related to the program scope. And we have this liaison coordination mailing. It's not a mailing list, it's just an alias basically, which is relatively new. So this is a direct way if you have any questions about liaisons to reach somebody or to reach the right person from the IAB about that. Okay, so as I said, we're talking about the technical work the IAB is doing here. So we will give you a quick update about domains, workshops, programs, and so on, and then we have some presentations. So updates, we actually have done quite a bit of work. We have published a new document, which is RC 9120. So that was some work about cleanups for APA, basically not too exciting, but it's a new document. We have one document which is just sent out for one document which is already approved by the IAB for publication and will come out as an RFC very soon. And we have still one document that is under discussion in the IAB, so it's already adopted as an document, and we are working on it, and you will hopefully see some progress on that soon. We have a brand new workshop report out there, which was submitted just this week. On the last workshop that we organized, and Wes will tell you about that. And we are currently running a call for community feedback about a new document that we would like to adopt in the IAB and start working on. So that's probably the most important part. If you want to provide feedback on this document, please send it directly to us or go to the architecture discuss list. That's where most of the discussion is happening. I just got a note that my audio and video is a little bit choppy. Is that true for everybody? Because then I turn off my video.
It's not unusable right now. We can.
It's not horrible,
okay.
but you're definitely on the edge.
Okay. Maybe this is because my partner is sitting in the other room also having video calls as you have it today. So if you don't hear me, just read the slides, right? It's the same. Okay, so program updates. We have an update later on the EDM program, so I will not say much. We have a second technical program running, which is a Model T program. There was an IAB review. There was a little bit of silence recently, and there was just a new discussion started right now to figure out how this group could get rescoped or continue some work. So probably there will be a meeting on September 2nd that you might want to join. You can also join the mailing list or find further information in the data tracker. Russ, do you want to add something about the Model T program?
No,
So what, yeah, okay.
No, I think that's about right. We do need to get it moving because it's interesting work, and we just need to figure out how to push.
Yeah, so watch out for that meeting and subscribe to the list. And then one more program, which is not the classical IAB technical program. It's a special case here because it works more like a working group, like a community program. But you might or might not be aware of this program. It's the IRC Future Editor Development Program, and this program is working on a new model for the IRC editor. And effectively, it has concluded most of its work. And there is one document, one draft that is redefining this new model. And the working group the program last call ended last Friday. So there are still a few issues to clear out, but nothing big anymore. The model, as it's described here on the slide, kind of stands. There's still an opportunity to provide more feedback. There will be more community calls before we actually publish this. So please look at the document right now, read it, provide feedback to the program mailing list. And you can also probably join the next interim meeting. We had a meeting yesterday, and there were still a few open issues, but so we might need another interim, but it's nothing big left. So this is really coming to an end now. And then IAB workshops, so another part of the technical work we're doing. So we had a workshop on measuring measuring network quality for end users in September, and that was really quite well visited. We had a huge amount of contributions and a lot of people in the workshop. I unfortunately couldn't join, but Wes will tell you more about this later. And as I said, the report is just out of the first draft version, but you might be able to already find some information there that's interesting for you. And then we have another workshop that we will organize end of November, and that workshop is on analyzing IETF data. So here the idea really is to look at the data that we provide, the metadata we provide in drafts in the data tracker about, for example, authorship, participation, and so on, and figure out if we can learn something from it, if we can see trends and what we can analyze. And effectively, there's a bunch of researchers who are already looking into this. So we thought it's good to have everybody in the room and talk to them and tell them what we would be interested in and see if we can learn something from it. And how our community looks like and how it evolves and how we can improve things in the process and in the community. So that's coming up, and we will publish the recordings afterward, and I will probably report back at the next IETF meeting. And with that, we go properly to the next presentation, so as I said, there will be a presentation from the EDM program, and there will be a presentation from the last workshop. And I forgot an S here, so the workshop presentation is not given by we, but by Wes. If there's no agenda bashing or any questions about what I just showed, we can move on with Tommy. But if anybody wants to jump in the queue, it's your time now. Or if you want to add some rest. So I stop sharing and Tommy is coming up. That's great.
All right. I'm just going to share slides. Thank you. All right. So I'm Tommy Pauly, one of the leads for the EDM program. My co-lead, David, is not here. He is the one who has the light up suits that go well with the EDM theme. I can only give you this slide. I apologize. Anyway, so this is our technical program on evolvability, deployability, and maintainability. everyone is free to join the mailing list. Please do it if you're interested. As a quick status update, we've had 2 calls since the last IETF meeting and the last IAB Open. One of those was to wrap up on draft IAB Use It or Lose It, which was mainly authored by Martin Thompson, and then we kind of completed it in the working group. That is currently in the RFC editor queue and should be published soon. So really happy that we could get that moved along. I think that's going to be a very useful contribution. So now we're essentially moving on to starting up some new efforts. There's another existing draft that we're looking at, but the thing I want to talk about today is what we had our last meeting on, which was discussing how we track protocol implementations and deployability. All right, so why does this matter? Why are we talking about this in an IAB program? Why in this program? I mean, overall, running code is how we determine deployability before we ship our protocols. It's a very important part of our process here. And as we're looking at the evolvability of protocols and how well they can be deployed, understanding kind of the practical aspects of how our implementation is working helps us get a clearer and more practical view. So tracking the implementations is also a way to help implementations do interop testing. We see a lot of success in working groups that are able to do a lot of interop testing, and that helps them validate that their protocol is working and will be deployable on the internet, dealing with middle boxes and understanding where ossification has already happened. Also, looking long-term towards the maintenance of protocols, it's important to understand how features have been adopted, which ones are, like, what extension points are actually working, which ones are successful, and understanding how protocols are being used helps us get a feedback into that loop. So Charles Eckel wrote a quick draft just to spark that conversation, and that's what we talked about at the last meeting, is the EDM find code draft. It summarized some of the current tools that people have to talk about implementation status. There's an implementation status section of drafts that's defined that gets removed before publication. So that's one way people can approach this problem. And some working groups use it, some don't. You have GitHub repos and wikis to track implementation status. And of course, there's IETF hackathon events and associated wikis, and those are all very successful. But part of the problem is that this is not necessarily very discoverable, and there's a lot of variety. And so we're wondering if there are ways to help working groups that want to do this type of thing have a really easy way to start doing this and get their draft authors and implementers involved. So some of the ideas the draft puts forward is that you could have essentially links to your running code or implementation status or interop test matrix that you could get to easily from places like your data tracker or from your working group GitHub, or even through the metadata that's associated with drafts and RFCs. So in order to understand what would be useful here, the first thing we've done is send out a survey to all the working group chairs to understand what's currently being done. So here's just a little example of some of the stuff we're asking. This was sent out, I think, a week and a half or 2 weeks ago. We've had some responses. If you are here and you are a working group chair and you have not filled out the survey yet, please look at your email and fill out the survey. We'd love to hear from you. So we'll talk about this at our next actual meeting, but just some of the initial stats when I looked at this earlier this week. Most of the working groups, slightly over half, are tracking implementation status in some way. I think we definitely see different trends in different areas of the IETF, and the methods are inconsistent. But almost all of the working group chairs said that they would like to have the information about their implementation status be more discoverable for people who are coming into their working groups. And most of them also express that they would like to be able to track this implementation status in a consistent way after RFC publication, which is something that the current guidance around an implementation status section of a draft does not provide. So I think there's interesting stuff to discuss here, and we'll be discussing this more at our next meeting amongst other topics, and we'll probably report back to IAB Open as well. So if there are any questions or thoughts, we'd love to hear them. Pete.
Am I here? Yes, I am here. Yay. First, hooray! Yes, this is great. Thank you. This is absolutely brilliant. I wonder how much the IESG has talked to you about this, and whether this could be folded into the moving along the standards track stuff that we have done a lousy job with for I can't remember how many years. This seems like it would fold in brilliantly, and if it became sort of something that working groups just did, it would make that whole question much easier.
Yeah, I think the ISG is aware of this topic, but we're definitely going to be talking to them more, especially as we get some feedback here. Can you elaborate just a little bit more on how you're imagining that could work, just so I understand for notes?
So I mean, ideal world, my thought would be, all working groups would just sort of do this as a matter of course. It would be the thing you do when you're working on something, you put it into the implementation pipeline. At that point, we used to have this just horrible time convincing people to move things along the standards track, which is why we went, got rid of draft standard. This to me just, and people still are not great about moving things to full standard. If this was just widespread, people would, I think, sort of fall into it and say, oh, sure, yeah, if we've got all the data to show that we're widely deployed and implementations are interoperable, they would just do it, and we'd have a lot more stuff getting to standard.
Yeah, totally aligned.
And it would also, and it would also reduce the temptation to stay at proposed standard forever and have the entire internet run on proposed standard, which kind of, it sort of reduces the utility of calling things standards in the first place. So this all seems great.
Yeah. And, certainly, I think we can have the view that, okay, the label between proposed standard and standard, I've heard it expressed that, that's just kind of a vanity label. But having it actually mean something and be related to the fact that we know that this actually is being used could make it more meaningful again. Yeah. Thank you.
So, yay team.
Cool. All right. Any other questions or thoughts? And I see that Charles has dropped the link to the survey in. So anyone who wants to fill it out. All right. Thank you all.
Thanks, Tommy. And then we go to Wes. Do you want to join us here?
You got my name wrong, so I gave you a little bit of flack.
Do you want to request sharing?
Yeah, 1 sec. I naturally closed the viewer right as I got to my turn.
So you can use this share preloaded slides button right next to the hand button, and that will just give you the slides from the data tracker. But you have to press it yourself.
It's true. I don't see mine.
Under your name, you have the join button, and then there's this kind of page thing.
Let's do it this way.
That was the other button, but you can also use that one.
Yep. All right, you see those? see the slides, I assume? Okay. So I'm going to talk about the IAB workshop for measuring network quality for end users, which we just held. We had 3 chairs for it, a very large program committee, and as you'll see in a minute, a large quantity of participation too, which was awesome. So a little bit of background, the world connectivity has gotten much, much better. I think, the prevalence of increased bandwidth everywhere has been fantastic. We actually now can do video chats. That was not possible just a few short years ago. But everybody still experiences local outages and issues that cause issues. As Miria noted earlier, she had sort of connectivity issues earlier in this meeting alone, and certainly we all have those at times. And there's a lot of inter-application resource competition too. There was video discussions, I think, in MapRG this week about what happens when multiple video streams are trying to compete for competition and which one wins, and examining the differences between different platforms. They're not all equal. So the goal was, how can we identify problem spaces in this area? What is a good user experience? Users often don't know this themselves, and if users don't know, how can we measure it? And then how can we communicate these measurements? Can we do it in a standardized way? And are there measurements that we can do that users can actually understand, or at least be able to report, other than something's not working? This is a graph from David Reed, who attended the workshop and presented this slide, and was one of many fantastic presentations that shows the FCC's longitudinal trend for load over data cable over time, and you can see that it's getting better. It says latency on the left hand side, and latency is just generally decreasing over time, which is fantastic. That's kind of one of the metrics that we want to see, but still, this is from Lucas Pardue, who had when you start thinking about where the problems are, right, there's a huge number of potential problems, including one of the ones that was discussed a lot during the workshop because it was humorous and because it was a good example of, my mom was microwaving a potato and it caused, the Wi-Fi connection to go bad. And you can imagine trying to get those predicted by the average end user as to what exactly is causing the problem. All they know is something's not working. They don't necessarily know why. So we held a workshop on this on September 14th to the 16th. We held it on WebEx, and we had 3 days, and it was 4 hours a day. And there was an hour set aside, there was an hour afterwards where people just hung out afterwards and talked for an additional hours beyond just the 4 hours a day. So it was neat that we had some side channel discussions and breakout rooms happen as well. There was 90 different attendees total. When I finally looked at the logs and counted them all, when we were taking notes, we noted that there was at least 76 at one particular time, but at least 90 different people participated over the course of the 3 days, which is a fair amount for a workshop. That's a fairly large IAB workshop, and certainly if we held it in a physical room, that couldn't have happened. So there's some benefit to virtual meetings because you can actually certainly take in a lot more people. The way that we had structured the workshop between the chairs and the program committee is we had 3 to 4 5-minute presentations with clarifying questions afterwards, and then we allowed for a lot of discussion time, and that format seemed to really work well. The discussion times were never blank. There was always people wanting to talk and discuss things, so we aimed for discussion, and that worked quite well. We broke the workshop down into details. So after reviewing a lot of the short papers that were submitted, we realized that they sort of broke into a number of categories. So we had introduction and background presentations about, where are we today, or, what's the current status, and what metrics, are being used today, followed by considerations of what metrics, we should actually be thinking about or concentrating on, or what's broken with current ones and things like that. And there's a lot of discussion around cross-layer. In other words, how do multiple things interact? And there's multiple aspects of cross-layer, which I think I have a little bit more detail on the later slide. But consider wireless versus wired. Consider multiple layers of the OSI stack, and all of these types of things. That's one of the things that makes it hard, right? Is you need to be able to measure stuff, not just at one place, because that's not the only place. If anybody's ever studied ping or traceroute, they're very different applications, and even traceroute, which has a lot more information, does not tell you exactly where the problem is on the path. And then finally, a synthesis of people that were offering sort of bigger solutions or more global views was sort of the concluding of the 4 sections. And then we did offer a conclusion discussion at the very last hour, which I'll go over next. But so the goal was to go from background through thinking through sort of solutions as the workshop progressed. So we took 30 minutes at the end to allow people, and this was sort of an experiment that I kind of came up with, to allow people to just make statements that they thought everybody might agree with, right? What were conclusions that kind of came out of all of the discussions over the course of 3 days that people thought were statements that everybody else would stand up behind? And so 24 sentences were written down, and we asked clarifying questions about them only as this was going on. And then we took another 30 minutes to, where people could actually say, wait a minute, I disagree with that one. That one's not under consensus. After that, we actually only eliminated 5 as really not achieving consensus out of 24, which that ratio to me surprised me. As we know in the IETF, we like to debate everything, right? But so, a good percentage of them actually came out as generally accepted. And then I later grouped them and documented into the Internet Draft, so you can go read them. I edited them a bit for context and added more information. Some of them were shorter, and they were really well understood by people that attended the group more than anything else. So I'm going to go over them in general, and I grouped them into a number of different sections, and I added bold words where I think you might find the most interesting points coming around. One of the nice things that kind of came out is there's a number of short, terse statements that I think describe the state of network quality today, right? Bandwidth is necessary, but not alone sufficient. One of the things that I think has been pushed heavily, or I should say the workshop really thought has been pushed heavily in the past decade, has been, we just need more speed, more speed, more speed, and that's not sufficient, and that's not alone what you need. I think gamers know that well, that they need better bandwidth and better latency, and gaming was talked about a lot because it's a low latency desired application. So you really need better bandwidth, right? You need not just more bandwidth, but you need better bandwidth. How can we make it better? And in order to really figure out if that's working, you need both active and passive measurements. You need the ability to do pings and trace routes and things like that I just mentioned, but you also need to be able to do passive measurements and how much bandwidth is going by, or what sort of applications are using data across the network, and how can I use what I see in order to measure it. But even active and passive measurements aren't useful if you can't compare things over time. So you need archivable and queryable metrics as well, so that you can look at trends over time, like the graph that I showed previously. You need to be able to see, are we trending the right direction, or what's getting worse? I think anybody studying academic papers knows that longitudinal papers are often the most interesting because they really show trends over time. But a meaningful metric for users is this network going to work for me? Will my application, the thing that I want to do, is it going to work? And this is where we get down to, how do you measure stuff for end users in a way that they will understand? And quite frequently it's, does my application work, or is my network insufficient? Do I have the right sufficient characteristics in a network or not? And one of the other important takeaways is, measurements are useless if you don't actually make change, if you don't incentivize goodness, right? So metrics that are measured should be actionable. Can we make decisions based on measurements? And are they actionable to the point where we can improve things or make changes to a network in order to improve things? And one other thing that came out was, we in the IETF and of course in the IB workshops, the goal should be to benefit all end users, and just segmenting a solution into something that is just for a small section of the internet is not exactly ideal, right? We should come up with technologies that benefit everyone everywhere. There's a bunch of more specific statements, and I'm not going to read each one of these quite as much as I did the generals, but One metric that was thrown around a lot is round trips per minute. It's a useful and consumable metric. I think on the server side that's been used for a long time, but it's also useful on the user side as well of how many transactions can I do or something like that per minute. But it's, you need to consider the full communication path from client to server and back, and how many times can you do that cycle. It's not just a one-way trip, for example. Applications are really needed that are new, that can report good measurements in order to identify insufficient points in network access. So this is I think one of the largest things that we're missing today is, I know that my network is broken. I know that somebody on the other side has taken a measurement of my video quality and my audio quality, and and told me that it's not good, right? And which reminds me, I hope that it's still good, because I could just be talking to myself. I have no way of knowing, right? I have no way of actually understanding whether my video and audio is actually getting out okay, until somebody interrupts me to say, no, you're still good, or nods their head or something like that, like you get in a room. And so we need better things that can actually identify problem points across the whole network from one point to another. Or more likely, these days you're actually having network applications that are reaching out to a lot of different places, and where is the exact JavaScript being pulled down to a web page that's actually breaking, that I can't get to that little piece, as opposed to everything else that actually is loading properly. So we need simple metrics, and we need metrics per application, which users are able to consume and report issues about what is working and what is not. I was noticing when I was looking at the data tracker earlier that I had to click submit, and I didn't get any feedback that my submit actually went through, right? I had no notion of yes, it is taking a bit, it is loading, because it is loading in the background. And so that's, to me, I wasn't sure if it was my network, I wasn't sure if it was the server, I wasn't sure if it was the application. One of the other things that we talked about a lot is the differences between quality of service versus quality of experience. So those are thrown around quite a bit, but they are sort of the quintessential things of how do we measure quality of service and how do we measure quality of experience, and they're not quite equal, right? How do we measure what the user is actually doing or experiencing? We also looked at some problem statements and concerns. So some of the statements that were made during the conclusion section were related to things that we had issues with. Latency, mean, and medians, or distractions, is one. The interesting thing is, I think most people know that if you look at Gaussian curves or all sorts of other metrics for trying to determine some statistical average about something, that if you just look at the mean and the median, you're missing a whole lot of information, right? A mean and a median can be great, but the standard deviation is so large that you end up with a lot of brokenness well beyond the mean and the median, for just as an example. And the second bullet there is actually kind of similar to some things that we said before. Some of these statements actually did have a lot of overlap, but it's frustrating that if you can only measure stuff but you can't simultaneously improve them, right? We should be able to improve them as well. And we need to figure out a way to motivate those improvements, right? So we need to come up with incentives for public network access that will motivate them. And again, this is similar to, if you just measure it, then that's not very helpful. And there was some discussion about the ecological impact of, one interesting aspect of measuring network quality is not just how well it works, but how well it's damaging the environment, or how well everything is in the long run. We could have great networks that do lots of Bitcoin mining. That's fantastic, but is that a long-term goal, or will it actually cause later issues that will eventually erode our networks, for example? And there's not evidence that any single metric is more important than others. And one of the hard things that I don't think that the workshop came to a complete conclusion about is, how do you do prioritization across multiple metrics? How do you find the right metric for the right time, for the right component of a network, right? How do there's not anyone that is perfect, and some are better than others, and how do you manage to put them all into one situation or one evaluation and get a concrete solution out of it? So in terms of future work, we want to document the workshop, the draft IAB, and that is the that acronym is yet horrible, but I figure we're good at horrible acronyms, so I just included. But it's measuring network quality for end users because it was too long to fit in the draft name, so I shortened it to an acronym that I don't think had been used until I put it into the draft. It is in the IAB, the Internet Architecture GitHub repository. People are welcome to do it. There is the URL that takes you to the workshop itself. All of the workshop discussions were actually held in, on recorded video, so they're all in YouTube, and there's links to them as well as all of the papers from that link. It was fascinating to listen to it. In fact, I still want to go back and rewatch it all before we finish publishing the entire report. And then there's discussions about where to go next, right? So we need to bring the work forward. There is some tasks that likely can be delegated to existing IETF working groups if there's immediate work to be done. And there was general, interest in where do we take longer term stuff. And I think that the takeout is really we should take research tasks to the IRTF. There was a little bit of discussion of do we need an IAB program for this? I think the general consideration is this is probably not program worthy at this point, but we have enough breakdown between IETF working groups and IRTF research groups that we're probably okay. So that is it for slides. I think I took almost exactly 10 minutes. Is there any questions or discussion on this?
Discussion in the chat.
Okay.
Not
I haven't followed the chat. Is there any discussions for the microphone?
Yeah, maybe if people want to bring it to the microphone, some of it.
Yeah. I will say, there's so much information in that workshop. It was hard to, there's no way to summarize it all. And it was a very dense workshop, which was fantastic to participate in. But I was, looking at writing the draft going, I don't even know how to summarize all that. So.
Yeah, I think the discussion in the chat is actually a little bit about metrics. There's also a draft in IPPM talking about round-trip times per minute as a different metric to use, for example. I guess there was also a lot of discussion at the workshop about metrics, right?
Yeah, I meant to throw out the IPPM working group as the most likely place for follow-on work to go, but trying to be generic and not pigeonhole it exactly there. Okay. In that case, I will turn it back to you guys, I think.
Yeah, I mean, people can still join the queue if they want to have more discussion, because that's why we're here. We don't have any other agenda item. We have the usual mic slot, so people can also just join the queue for any other questions they have to the IAB if they want to. And maybe to, I mean, we have the technical plenary, which was already last week, and usually not in the technical, so we had the administrative plenary last week already. So usually we try to concentrate on more of the administrative questions at that plenary. So this open mic is really for technical questions based on any kind of workshop, any kind of documents we're working on, workshops or programs, or even if you want to raise a topic that you think the IAB should be aware of. That's your chance. And we have Martin.
I just want to say what I said in the chat, which is put in a plug for IPPM next session, which is going to have a draft about RPM.
Okay, I mean, if there's nobody who wants to speak up, has any questions or any comments, we can actually close the session here. But I'm feeling a little bit bad if I would close the session now while there's still discussion ongoing in the chat. So I give you a few more minutes to take the chance and speak up at the mic. Charles.
Yeah, I had a quick question for actually for Tommy on the survey. Is there a a deadline, or perhaps we should set a deadline for when responses are requested there, so people know if that's something they need to kind of quickly do this week, or think we'll get more responses if we put a deadline. Everyone's deadline driven.
Yeah, we've gotten a fair amount of responses. I've been pretty happy with that so far. I'm hoping that this reminder, and maybe I'll send a ping to the list today just to tell people, hey, here's the link again, go fill it out. But I imagine after, just kind of naturally after like a week or so, anyone who's going to respond will respond. So I don't think necessarily needs a deadline, but yeah, probably by certainly by December I'll just say, okay, here's the results, and we'll go look at it as a program.
Okay. And then one other thing I put in the chat, just kind of more of a comment, is my personal interest with the fine code draft is also a bit broader than implementation status and
Yes.
finding the interoperability aspect, which is super important, and I think a goal as well. But I'm also very interested in just any code related to it, like some of the code that we've done in the hackathon, and it kind of helps you with understanding a protocol, or maybe implementing it, or viewing traffic on the network, or any kind of test tools. Those types of things too are super helpful, just to help people to implement some of the standards that we're specifying in these drafts. So I'd be interested in that as well.
Yep. Great. Thank you.
And we have Spencer in the queue.
I wanted to thank the IEB for doing the public viewing of IEB meetings, and for one specific reason, which was the IEB has been doing reviews of research groups on an ongoing basis for as long as I have known about, and they have not tended to be very public. I had the opportunity to watch, not participate in, but watch the PanRG review that the IEB did fairly recently, and having that be minuted and viewable as as it was happening and things like that was super useful for me. And I hope other research group participants will take advantage of that when the IEB is reviewing their research groups. But thank you all for doing that.
Thank you for the feedback. So yeah, you're right that these reviews haven't been that much public, because usually we used to do them during the meeting week in one of our breakfast meetings, and those are not as public as our calls usually are. Given the circumstances, we now have integrated them into our frequent calls, so we can schedule them anytime. And those calls are actually open for observers, so you can join any IEB call and listen in. Russ, did you want to add anything, or are you just here to say goodbye?
No, I think I'm good. I would encourage people to join the IAB, the calls that they can join other than executive sessions as an observer. We have a lot of good technical stuff going on right now, and we actually have a lot of drafts and stuff we could use help with.
Yeah, I mean, check out the IAB webpage and try to find the agenda there. It's there's actually a direct link on the front page on the right side.
Yeah.
And you can see that we not only have those boring IAB calls where we talk about administrative matters, we now have actually calls that we label as technical discussions, where we only discuss one technical topic. So this could be interesting for you as well, if you want to check out. But also, as you just said, documents, I just want to remind people, please review the past English document, where we have the call for feedback out there right now, and check out the other work we are doing in the programs. And now we have more people in the queue, so Robin is next. Robin, I think we heard you already if you say something.
Okay. In fact, I made this want to have some comments on this the draft. That's the pass signal. Yeah, because you know that's this time we have the APN work, and we propose that's the solution that including the data plane encapsulation, and also this is the control plane, and this is the young model for this work. So that will be helpful to understand this one. Yeah, but you know that's from my point of view. So you know that there's also there's the discussion about the open internet and the limited domain. And according to our the discussion about the APN work, so we can feel this we can feel this the possible difference, even for this the pass signal and also the APN work seems similar. That's the application and the networking. That's this integration. But you know that for the APN work, that is the limited domain. So it can only use the available the packet header information to map to some the APN ID. But you know that if this pass signal, so this is maybe that means this the signal information can be directly derived at the host and the application. That is maybe more specific because it's very clear about what's the user and what's the application. So from my point of view, so that when for this draft, from my point of view, it should be thinking about the possible difference between the open internet and the limited domain.
So if you remember, I think at the last IAB open meeting, we actually had a presentation about this draft, and we had a bit of discussion there and got a lot of input that was really good. And I think a similar comment was made. So the last revision of this draft, we actually updated it to add a little bit more text about this. You should probably just read it yourself, but I think the considerations, I personally think, and I'm an author of that draft, I think the considerations are not that different for limited domains. You need security also in limited domains. You have to protect about unknown attackers that attack your network. So I don't think there's a huge difference, and that's what we're mentioning in the draft. But I mean, please have a look and provide more feedback and start a discussion on the architecture discuss mailing list, I think.
Okay.
Thank you. Wes?
Thanks. I just wanted to follow on a little bit about Russ's great comment of the IAB meetings are all open except for executive session, and that's the part that I wanted to talk about. We have almost nothing in executive session, and I know I talked to somebody a year or two ago that thought, we always go straight into executive session, and that is we spent like maybe 5 minutes, and it's only when we're looking at background information for people we're going to appoint or comments that when we collect public feedback. That is about it. We've actually had almost no executive sessions for the past 3 years that I've been in the IAB.
Yeah, I can assure you that if you're missing the executive session, you're only missing the boring stuff. So no worries there. Spencer again.
I don't think you're supposed to say that in front of the IAB members and potential IAB nominees, but it is true. The question I was going to ask is probably for something that Russ was mentioning about having documents that the IAB would like to have help on. And I'm a little curious about two things. One is kind of how we would know that. And number two is there an obvious time for us to try to be helpful? Like often the notices I will see are for IAB a call for comments on adoption or something like that. I mean, but I'm a little vague on how the people who could help would know that they should be helping and should be helping now.
Maybe,
Yeah.
so I mean, I think your question is really good, but maybe I also want to preamble this. So when we publish a document on the IAB stream, it's also kind of an opinion piece from the IAB, right? So we were looking for a lot of input because the IAB has some smart people, but we don't know everything, and we don't want to miss important stuff, right? But at some point, it's also, you know, what the IAB thinks is the right advice to the community. Russ, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, yeah. And, you know, if you attended some of the technical sessions, you'd see some of the stuff we were working on and maybe get involved a bit sooner than when it's published. I don't really know of another good way of, or just look at the meeting minutes from the old meeting minutes and look at some of the stuff we're working on. You don't have to attend the meeting necessarily. Just say, oh, yeah, see, the IAB talked about blah, blah, blah. They might be doing a document there. Let me go find out.
So just from the process point of view, for a couple of years already, we have two steps where we actually reach out to the, explicitly reach out to the community. One is before we adopt a document as an IB document. That's what the passing document is right now. So this is an early stage, and this is a really good point to provide a lot of input because that's where we can still scope and change the document. And the other one is very, very late, just because before we want to publish the document. So that's the point where the document is basically done. And if you have a severe concern, we might still consider it, but we're not planning to change the document at all. But we do have these 2 points in the process where you can easily engage. And between those 2 points, or even before that first point, we try to actually bring it to this meeting here, because that's where we have discussion time with the community.
Thank you all. Have a great IETF.
Robin.
In fact, you know, I'm not sure that if you have this talk to the community about the point or not. In fact, I think that's the IB meeting that is open, and now that's the every month, the fourth week, we will have a dedicated meeting for the technical discussion. We wish that the community members can bring that interest topic to the IB so that we can help to schedule this one. We can have some of the discussion in the IB. This is the meeting, open meeting. So that's my suggestion. Okay.
Yeah, definitely. If you have topics, and that's another purpose of this meeting, if you have topics that you think the IAB should consider, please bring it to us. So, and now I think we actually reached the end of the queue, and we can just stop a few minutes early here. I don't think anybody would be too sorry about that. So in that sense, thank you everybody for the meeting. If you have any further questions, please reach out to the IAB, reach out to me, reach out to Russ or everybody else in the IAB. And see you next time.